Okay, so the camera's working, so that's good. I had a double of a time getting the camera to start. Uh, so it turns out by an odd coincidence, just as I was starting this series, Star Trek premiered on September 8th, 1966, and it is now September 8th. So how about that? And I'm about to review the very episode that they started with, which was the man trap. Now, I actually went and took like a whole bunch of notes. You can see my chicken scratch right there. And, I don't know if I'm going to do this for every episode because it started to make it seem like work. And I don't want to work when I'm doing these. I want to have fun. I want you to have fun with me. I want us to enjoy watching these episodes together. And I do advise that you watch the episode 2 before you watch my video. If you're well familiar with the original series, you probably won't have to. It couldn't hurt to refresh yourself with it. If you haven't seen the episodes at all, you probably want to watch them before you get my opinion on them. So I called it a review, but I don't even know if it's going to be formally a review. It's going to be kind of like more like my thoughts on the episodes. So like I said, I'm mainly looking to have some fun with this. I just wanted to watch the episodes again myself, and I thought, it might be fun to share my thoughts about them with my friends as I do that. So, and if you're watching this, you're my friend. So, anyway, the man trap was not the first episode shot, not even close. But when they went to broadcast the show, apparently the Corbomite maneuver, which was the first episode that they shot, hadn't finished post-production yet. So they couldn't show that one. They didn't want to go with the Naked Time or Charlie X, because those were kind of more like character pieces. And they wanted something that was a little more action-packed and kind of demonstrated the Wagon Train to the Stars concept. Strange new worlds and new civilizations and stuff like that. So they went with the Man Trap, which the Man Trap is a solid episode, and it's probably not a bad episode to start with. But like I said, I do wish that the discs were in production order, because I feel like that would be able to, then I'd be more able to comment on the evolution of certain characters and concepts. But I kind of feel like this is late enough in the series that they made this episode that a lot of this stuff is already established. Of course, there will be changes and evolutions as the show goes on, but it's already pretty much solidly Star Trek. You got Kirk, Bones, and Spock, and they're having an adventure on an alien planet, and there's a monster, and the monster is a more sympathetic character, so we're starting to find out. So when the episode starts, the crew all beams down, and Kirk mentions in the captain's log that one of the people that's on the planet below that they're visiting used to be an old flame of Dr. McCoy's. This is actually a very Bones-centric episode, so it makes sense that I'm wearing what I consider to be my Bones shirt. So, so yeah, they beam down to the planet, and Captain Kirk is, giving Bones a little bit of a hard time about this and teasing him, and basically just grabs a handful of grass and hands it to him. It's like, usually when a man sees a woman he used to love, he gives her flowers. They like that sort of thing. And he has a shit-eating grin on his face, and Bones is obviously irritated by this. And is that how you get women to like you? By bribing them? And it's kind of funny because later on in Star Trek 2, Bones will give Kirk a similar hard time about Carol Marcus, so I guess finally he gets his revenge for that. But yeah, it's kind of funny to me to see Captain Kirk just being such a wise ass for no particular reason. Uh, but yeah, Nancy Crater is the old girlfriend of Dr. McCoy, and she seems to be kind of like the one that got away, and she is married to Professor Crater, who is a jerk. We're gonna find out, and the crew that beams down is Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy and an ensign. I believe he's an ensign, at least going by his rank insignia, which is non-existent. They beam down to the planet, and that's Darnell. Is the man's name, and he is apparently in the medical/science division because he's wearing a blue shirt. Now, this is going to be the first random crewman to die on Star Trek, at least by production. If you're watching this for the first time as being broadcast, he is technically the first red shirt, even though he's a blue shirt. So, in fact, the other officers that get killed in this episode, they aren't wearing red shirts either, but we'll get to that. So, when Nancy comes into the scene, and she's seeing like some kind of Disney princess, like you half expect like a bird to come down and land on her finger or something. And Bones gets a look at her, and he's kind of shocked to see that she looks exactly as he remembers her, and just as gorgeous as, the day that they parted. And Kirk sees something different. He still sees Nancy, but he sees her as more of, an older, a handsome woman, as they used to say, with streaks of gray in her hair and everything like that. Darnell, on the other hand, sees a woman that he left behind on Wrigley's Pleasure Planet, which that's the first mention of this on here, and it seems like it's sort of a hedonistic place where people go to, have pleasure. And so basically he's saying, when he says, oh, you look like a woman I left behind on Wrigley's Pleasure Planet, it's like, it's pretty much he's saying like, oh yeah, you look like a hooker that I used to. So Bones obviously isn't very happy about that, and I also noticed that they're wearing the brown utility belts that they wore in early first season episodes. Like, you see them in Corbomite Maneuver, where they're wearing those brown utility belts. And the Naked Time, they're wearing those. Scotty is wearing one with a phaser on it when he goes to, use the phaser to cut through the lock to the door to get to Riley. But we'll get to that eventually. So, anyway, Crater, I believe, is the real villain of this episode. It's not Nancy / the Salt Vampire. She actually winds up being a more sympathetic character, I think. But Crater is somebody that is much more villainous, and he wants to get the Enterprise crew off the planet as soon as possible, probably because he doesn't want them to figure out that he's got the Salt Vampire here, and we'll get into why that is later. We cut back to the Enterprise, and Spock has the con, and Uhura is, discussing with him, like, that if she hears the word frequency one more time, she'll cry, and he's like, that's a highly illogical, reaction for a security, or for a communications officer, and she's just trying to flirt with him, man. People have a problem with the relationship between Spock and Uhura in the Kelvin movies, which is, like, actually a thing. But, like, it does have its roots in the original series where she does kind of try to flirt with Spock a little bit. And in some cases, I feel like he actually reciprocates it a little bit in his own Spock-like way. But we'll get to that in a future episode. But here, Spock is at least playing it aloof and, not really responsive to any of her flirts. Like, she's like, why don't you tell me I'm an attractive young lady? Or, how you'd like to see me under your Vulcan moon on a, you know, hot summer night or whatever. And he's like, Vulcan has no moon. Just kind of playing it aloof and cool. And she's like, I don't doubt it, Mr. Spock. I like Uhura a lot in these earlier episodes when she's a bit more saucy. And they gave her a bit more leeway. We'll talk about this in Charlie X and The Naked Time also. But I kind of feel like they were able to, or willing to, one or the other, maybe a little bit of both. They let Uhura get away with a little bit more in these earlier episodes because she wasn't the main female character. She wasn't the female lead. She was just a supporting female character. So they were willing to let her, be a little more brassy and, flirtatious and things like that. She seems to become a little more sort of professional when she becomes the main female lead, and I think that's a shame. At this point, the main female lead was supposed to be Janice Rand, although she only sticks around for like half the first season. Then we find out that Darnell has been killed on the planet, and he was, of course, killed by the salt vampire, but the salt vampire very cleverly makes it look as if he took a bite out of a poisonous plant, but Spock and Bones don't buy this, really. Spock responds to this about as clinically as you would expect, but if you're really paying attention to Nimoy's acting, it's pretty obvious that he is affected by the death of the crewman, and he's trying his best to hide it. As Uhura herself points out, they don't know who it is who died. It could even be Captain Kirk himself. But Spock keeps his composure about it. Of course, he's the proud, logical Vulcan, and any display of emotion would be distasteful. So he's basically like, there's nothing I can do about it. The transporter room is well equipped. They'll call me if they need me. But you can tell that he's more affected by this than he's letting on. There's a joke when Captain Kirk gets back to the bridge about Captain Dominguez wanting his supplies, and then Kirk says something about that he's got his chili peppers and they're prime Mexican chilies, and he's gonna have to wait on them. I think if this joke were made today, people would probably complain that it was a racial stereotype against Mexican people or whatever with this chili pepper joke, but you got to look at it in the context of the time. And back then, it was kind of just more progressive to think of the fact that Kirk had a friend and an equal who was a Hispanic person, a Latino, however you want to phrase that. If he's Mexican, it's probably both. But yeah, so then there was that in there. We get what's our first use of the Spockoscope, the library computer, which would be referenced on Futurama as the Spockoscope, which was, I thought, a nice homage to the original series. I always found this thing fascinated, this kind of hooded visor that he looked into, and you just saw kind of like this blue light bathing his face. Spock was the only one who really saw this, so he would get back to us with the information. There's another landing party that beams down to the planet. Two more random crewmen named Sturgeon and Green, and they're both killed by the salt vampire. The rest of the crew finds the body of Sturgeon, but the salt vampire impersonates crewman Green, who in hindsight looks an awful lot like Shia LaBeouf. There's a really good shot of Kirk walking down the corridor to the turbo lift, and it's shot with a handheld camera. And it's the sort of thing you saw a lot in the early first season with these experimental type shots, and you didn't see that very much later on. It became a little more sort of standard, but it's really cool to see them experimenting with the camera work and finding interesting ways of showing off this ship interior set, which is quite impressive for its time. Uh, then we see Yeoman Rand for the first time, and she's walking through the corridors with a tray, and the tray has a salt shaker on it. And I remember reading in, I think it was the book The Making of Star Trek, about how they got all these exotic salt shakers. Like, they went to a store and they bought like all these salt shakers that they thought were really exotic and futuristic looking to use as a potential salt shaker in the episode. And the prop master was basically like, we can't use any of these because you can't tell it's a salt shaker. It's so futuristic looking and weird, and we just need something that the audience can immediately tell is a salt shaker. So they basically just used a regular old 20th century salt shaker, and they had all these kind of fancy futuristic looking salt shakers, and that they wanted to do something with them, so they wound up becoming medical instruments for Dr. McCoy. Like, a lot of the times when you see him like with some kind of sensor, like running him over the patient, yeah, that was oftentimes one of these salt shakers. So, fun fact. Uh, as Yeoman Rand walks through the corridors, there are several crewmen that kind of checking her out there in her little mini skirt, uh, and making comments about, I'd like to have her as my personal yeoman, if you know what I mean, and that sort of thing. But Crewman Green, he's just interested in that salt shaker because he's really the salt vampire. So he's following her around, and she notices that he's acting oddly, and Rand winds up taking the tray to Sulu, which she's not Sulu's yeoman, she's Captain Kurt's. So I would have to imagine that she's just doing this as a personal favor to Sulu. She does seem interested in a lot of his plants and friendly towards them. So, it might be also that, like, she wanted an opportunity to go by and see the plants. But I like to think it's because her and Sulu have, like, a personal friendship beyond working together on the bridge. And, she, just brought him some lunch. Maybe he asked her, hey, could you swing by here and bring me something to eat? Because I'm hungry and I'm busy with my botany work, or something like that. Or maybe, she just thought to, bring him by a little something. Hey, I'm on my way back to my quarters. I'm going to be passing by there. You need anything? You've been in there a while with those planets. So, but I like that sort of thing, these kind of interactions between the crew, because then it kind of leads you to kind of speculate and think that there might be, there's more to these people's lives than what we see on the show. I like that. It's around this time that probably because Green is acting like such a creep. Oh, there's one more thing. Uh, I already mentioned Sulu's hobby of botany. That was going to be one of the quirks of Lieutenant Sulu that wound up getting dropped later on. Is that initially he was supposed to be a guy who just had all these different hobbies, and botany was one, fencing was another. Every time he would have some new hobby that he was getting into, and that was supposed to be a running gag, but it wound up getting dropped. And Sulu, when Yeoman Rand brings the food to his quarters, is like, "May the great bird of the galaxy." That's the first mention of the great bird of the galaxy, which wound up becoming a nickname for Gene Roddenberry. So anyway, at this point, the Salt Vampire, since they're suspicious of Crewman Green, winds up shapeshifting again, and I think the implication here is that he plucks a character from Uhura's subconscious, The salt vampire actually has like a limited telepathic ability, and the salt vampire shifts into a handsome black crewman who can speak Swahili. And Uhura mentions before that, like, there's she would have remembered meeting a crewman like this on the ship, so obviously she was into him. But she winds up getting saved from a horrible fate when Sulu and Rand come by and the salt vampire scatters. Uh, Kirk suggests that since Bones is having a hard time sleeping, that he take some sleeping pills. And in this video, I thought was interesting is that Kirk was actually eating something himself on the bridge of the Enterprise, which he didn't see too often. But I'm guessing since the situation was dire and he probably knew he needed to have something to eat, he just decided to, scarf something down real quick on the bridge. The salt vampire again disguises herself as Nancy and goes to Bones. And she says something interesting is that she likes the thoughts that she gets from Bones more than she likes the thoughts that she gets from Professor Crater. And, I think that, that's probably because Bones is a good and decent person, and Professor Crater is a horrible person. And, they discuss this a little later. We'll get to it then, but he's basically like using the salt vampire. Nancy convinces Bones to take the sleeping pills that Kirk was suggesting that he take, and then Nancy uses this opportunity to shapeshift into Dr. McCoy. So the salt vampire will be in the form of Dr. McCoy for a good chunk of the episode. We see a dead security guard, which has a rather interesting type of armor that he's wearing, which, I don't remember seeing again. I'll point it out if I see it in another episode, but, you didn't see it too often. Normally they were just red shirts. Then we have a confrontation on the planet between Kirk and Spock and Professor Crater. And there's a really nice shot where Spock points while he's holding a phaser. And I think that's like really, like, he points with his finger as he's holding the phaser. And I think that's a great shot. It really stood out in my mind. Then they find Green's body, so they know that whatever is up on the ship now, it can assume other forms. So they have another piece of the puzzle as far as trying to track down the salt vampire. I also noticed that there were a lot of background extras milling around in the corridors in this episode, and they become a little more sparse later on because background extras are expensive. So they didn't have as many of them, but it was nice to see the Enterprise as it probably should be, with lots of crewmen milling about, everybody on their way to and fro to their next duty or to get their rest or whatever. And I also noticed that there are some female characters in the male uniform, like with a tunic and pants, rather than the miniskirt. And this was something that would get dropped later on, and the miniskirt would just become kind of like the exclusive uniform that the women wore. Like in the first two pilots, they have a female type of tunic with a special collar, and they all wear pants. And from what I understand, both Grace Lee Whitney and Nichelle Nichols, who both had a background in dance and both had really nice legs, they wanted to show them off, so they liked wearing the miniskirt outfits. And apparently a lot of the female crew members, like actors that would play them for like guest starring parts and stuff, they liked wearing those kind of outfits. People look back at them now, it's like, oh, it's so sexist, but they forget that, like, at the time, the miniskirt was actually supposed to be kind of an empowering thing. It wasn't necessarily just like, something so that dudes could see their legs. It was them taking back that power. So, you gotta kind of look at this stuff in the context of its time. I like the miniskirts, so I don't care. Of course, I like them because I like girls' legs. Uh, uh, So, Kirk and Spock wind up capturing Dr. Crater. Kirk stuns him with the phaser. By the way, the weapon that Crater has is an old school laser pistol like they had in the cage. So, obviously it was done to recycle a prop that they already had on hand, but I think it works really well because it winds up, you know, giving the idea that, he was stuck on this planet and has some outdated equipment. It adds a little bit of a layer to the whole thing. They could have just as easily, I guess, given him, like, one of the modern style phasers that, the rest of the Enterprise crew had, but no, he had the outdated model, and I liked that. Uh, when he's stunned, it's interesting because he's not knocked all the way unconscious, but he is still, like, at least somewhat lucid. And when they're trying to talk to him, like, they slow down his voice as if it were being slowed on a tape recorder or film. And I liked that. That was kind of a neat little thing. Like, the stun actually maybe affects your brain and doesn't let it, go quite like it should. Uh, Crater is, talking about the creature and saying that it's the last of its kind and its acting only survive. And of course, Kirk is like, "Your creature is killing my people," which is the main thing he obviously cares about. So they have a briefing room scene, and it's a debate. And Nancy is still disguised as Bones. Crater can recognize her. He's familiar enough with the creature that he can recognize her in any form. And Bones is of course trying to be like, well, we could try to give the creature some salt without trying to trick it. It's only trying to survive. Just give it some salt, man. It'll be cool. And of course, like, that might have worked if the creature hadn't been killing a bunch of crew members. Uh, Spock goes off with Bones on his mission mainly because he's suspicious of Bones, and it turns out he's right, of course. Uh, so Nancy kills Professor Crater. Good riddance. That guy was a jerk. Uh, Kirk had this little speech earlier where he was talking to Professor Crater about how, like, he was basically using the Salt Vampire and the Salt Vampire's shape-shifting abilities, and how he could basically have everyone in the galaxy at his beck and call because of this Salt Vampire and its shape-shifting abilities. Crater tells us that it wasn't just salt that the Salt Vampire needed, it was love, and he was willing to provide it, even though it turns out that the Salt Vampire had killed the original Nancy. So, but Crater just strikes me as a jerk, and he was just using this creature, like, in the same way that the creature was using him, but it was even worse. Because, the Salt Vampire was doing what it needed to do to survive, basically. And Crater, I think, was taking advantage of the Salt Vampire just for his own personal pleasure. So, he was a rotten piece of work, and I'm glad he died. When the Salt Vampire attacks Spock, of course it doesn't really affect Spock the same way because he has green blood and not red blood, so it's different from the salts that are in human blood. And I guess, it doesn't work for Nancy. So Spock, of course, is, kind of stunned by this attack, but he recovers quickly. Uh, the Salt Vampire shifts back into Nancy and then runs to Bones for protection. And, Kirk manages to track down Nancy in Bones' quarters. And he's got some salt tablets and his phaser. And he's basically trying to taunt Nancy away with the salt tablets while keeping the phaser trained on her. Probably trying to capture her It seems like he's trying to capture her because he could have just shot her if he wanted to shoot her. But but Bones is trying to protect Nancy because he doesn't know anything about this salt vampire stuff yet. He knows that the crewmen were drained of salt, but he doesn't know how. He certainly doesn't know that Nancy is a shape shifting salt vampire. So she he's basically trying to hold her back, but it's like he's trying to protect her from Kirk, but she's trying to come towards Kirk, and I guess he's so caught up in this he doesn't notice that she's trying to get to Kirk because she wants to get those salt pellets. But eventually Nancy winds up attacking Kirk and trying to drain the salt from his body. And then that's when Spock comes in and just starts beating the holy hell, like double-fisted axe handles against Nancy. And if she were really Nancy, could she take all of this? And just beating the crap out of her. It's not the sort of thing you're used to seeing from Spock. I know that, aroused, his great strength can be quite deadly, but, it's usually you see him to be all calm and logical and everything like this, but I guess in this case, the most logical thing for him to do is beat the hell out of a middle-aged woman to prove that she's actually like a space alien that's much more durable. So, at this point, the salt vampire winds up returning to her natural form, which is a hideous and pathetic-looking creature that was created by a gentleman named Hua Chang. I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about him. He was a sculptor who worked quite extensively on the original series. He created pretty much all the creatures that they had on there, as well as a lot of their props. Pretty much any prop that you saw on there that was made for the show, he created it. The phasers, the tricorders, the communicators, everything. The guy was a genius. And a brilliant sculptor in his own right. Like, Star Trek was just kind of like a small part of what he did, but I kind of feel like it was probably the thing that was most important to the cultural lexicon, because everybody knows what a phaser or a tricorder or communicate. Everybody knows what it is when you flip your wallet open like this and pretend to talk into it. So once the salt vampire is revealed, Bones realizes that this isn't the woman that he loved, and he winds up killing her with a phaser, and she dies. She shapeshifts back into Nancy one last time, and then shapeshifts back into the salt vampire when she's dead. So, and the crew feels bad about this because, she was the last of her kind, and, she was just trying to survive at the end of the day, and nobody's really happy that they had to kill the salt vampire, but they weren't left with any choice. Scotty was not on this episode, and that's kind of interesting because when the script was originally written, the writer of the episode felt that there would be a strong bond between Kirk and Scotty. And Scotty was actually the one who was with Kirk through most of the episode, but Gene Roddenberry felt very strongly that the bond should be between Kirk and Spock. So he changed a lot of that, and I guess they wound up just taking Scotty out of the episode entirely. So yeah, Scotty was originally supposed to be in this episode, and he's not. So the American public watching this episode for the first time in 1966, the first episode of Star Trek that would be broadcast on television, they would have to wait to meet the ship's venerable engineer. So, The Man Trap was a solid episode. I enjoyed watching it again for, I must have seen it countless times at this point. It was one that I remember being rerun quite a bit when I was a kid, and, well, of course, since it's like the first episode on the DVD set, it's usually one of the first episodes I watch. It's a solid episode, and we'll have even better episodes to come. So, My next episode will be Charlie X, about an annoying little snot with godlike powers. And that's something that we'd see quite a bit on Star Trek going forward. I believe there's a trope name for it called God Boy. But but yeah, we would see this this kind of plot revisited many times as Star Trek would go on. So anyway, thanks for watching this with me and boldly going where several people have gone many times before. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and all the fun YouTube stuff down below. Leave a comment and tell me what you thought of The Man Trap. And do you think that this was a good decision to go with this episode as the first episode of Star Trek to be broadcast? Or perhaps you think one of the other episodes might have worked better? I'm interested to know your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. And I will talk to you next time. Live long and prosper. Belk out.